Beard. He is a senior scientist at NREL, and he'll be talking to us today about quantum dot solar cells and can they exceed the Shockley Quasar limit. And came to NREL through Yale University, where he did his PhD with Charlie Schmutenmeyer, and then after a brief stint at NIST, came to NREL in the early 2000s. And so we'll be interested in hearing about terahertz spectroscopy and other things today.
All right, can we turn the lights down? Is this on? Can you hear me, Matt? Good. What's that? Okay. All right, so yeah, thanks for having me down. I guess I have to follow Mark. Is he still there? Anyways, that was a really nice talk about PFT. I definitely enjoyed it a lot. But there'll be a little bit of a shift. I'm going to talk about quantum dots. And if you went, I guess if you were here yesterday, you heard from collaborator, co-worker, Art Nozick. So I definitely want to acknowledge all the great co-workers at NREL that have contributed to the work that, some of the work that I'll be talking about today. And the question that we want to answer is, can quantum dot solar cells exceed the Shockley Quasar limit? You know, what's the progress towards that? So I'll be talking about MEG and things like that. So yeah, high efficiency approaches to solar energy conversion. I'll be talking about quantum dots. What are quantum dots? And multi-exciton generation of quantum dots. But to start out with, I just wanted to, I know you probably have seen some of this, but I'll put this up anyway. What are the outlooks for effects of global energy use? We all know we have 12 terawatts currently consumed, and a projected of 28 terawatts. So we have a huge need to come up with new sources of energy. The largest energy resource by far is the sun. There's 165,000 terawatts of sunlight that hit the Earth every day. Okay, so if you have your eye clickers, we have our first question. So, you don't have solar panels on your roof because, boy, that just pushed start. All right, I guess you can respond now. Who's got their eye clickers? So is this supposed to show the responses? I got 10 responses, 12, 14. But where's the histogram?
Just make it a little histogram.
20 responses. Most people are responding to A. Don't go home. That's pretty good. We got 3 responses for C. They're too heavy. I'm getting some B's. The sun doesn't shine. And some D's. You do? All right, that's good. More responses. 7 people will say they have solar cells. That's okay. Does anybody own land in Wyoming? A lot of natural gas exploration going on, both in Colorado and in Wyoming. And the problem is that that's really driving down the cost of oil and gas right now. So that's a big issue. Okay, so the big issue, of course, is that we need to lower the cost. So most people, the favorite response is, hey, you don't know. The correct answer is C. All right, so what are the problems and what's the basic thing that we're trying to do with solar energy conversion? Well, it seems pretty simple. We have to absorb a photon. We produce some sort of an excited state. Sometimes that can be an exciton, and so forth. Okay. Once we form that excited state, we have to separate the charges, make a charge-separated complex or something like that. And we have to produce these long-lived excited states that produce mobile charge carriers, and then we have to extract them out. So, there's only 4 things that we have to do here. Absorb photons, produce long-lived excited states, transport them and collect the charge carriers. That doesn't seem so hard, so what's the problem? Why don't we all have solar cells on our roof? Well, the problem is that the solar spectrum is pretty broad. There's a lot of different photon energies in the solar spectrum. This is what it looks like above the Earth. This different components in the atmosphere absorb different photon energies, so we get holes in the spectrum. We can't see it here, but I just blocked out this. If we're only absorbing that amount of sunlight, so that's the first problem. We don't absorb all the sunlight when we have a solar cell. But the big problem here is that it's pretty diffuse. So I told you there's a lot of energy in the sunlight, but it's very diffuse. It's only 1 kilowatt per meter squared at noon that's hitting the Earth. So if we're having a 10% conversion, then that's 100 watts per meter squared. So we can put these light bulbs 100 meters squared apart. So it's a fairly diffuse source, and we have a lot of different photon energies that we have to deal with. So it's a hard problem. We need a lot of material to cover a large area. So material cost is a huge issue. All right, what are our technological goals? So this plot shows the module efficiency on this axis over the total cost of the module, dollar per meter squared. And so straight lines on this are constant dollars per peak watt. And you can convert that into cents per kilowatt hour. So basically, it just says that if we can go up in efficiency, then we can afford a more efficient solar cell, or a more costly solar cell. If we have to go down in the module cost, then we need to go up in efficiency. So this was in 2009 numbers. I'm too lazy to update. But everything's moving to the left here. So silicon, crystalline silicon manufacturing cost was about here, $2.70 per peak watt. That's gone way to the left on this plot in the last couple of years. But in any case, the selling point was $3.80. And then what the cost to industrial and home was high, 21 to 46 cents per kilowatt hour, 37 and 81 cents per kilowatt hour, depending on where you live and so forth. But the average U.S. rate for electricity was 9 cents per kilowatt hour. So we have like about an order of magnitude to get below that cost. Well, what can we do? Well, there's players in the game. This was First Solar. They're right on this dollar per peak watt. Now they moved to the left as well. So we have to compete with that, and they were at about 12% efficiency. So there's only a certain point that you can drive down the cost of your module. Eventually you're going to get to zero, and you can't go to zero, of course. There's some cost to the module. So what we want to do is go up. There's a huge space up here, and that's third generation. This is the Shockley quasar limit. That's 33%. The current cell module in the lab is about 25.6%. So that's what that line there represents. So how can we do this? Well, I would say the hot carrier, we need to utilize these hot carriers. And so this is really the scientific challenge that we've been tackling for many years. That is, when you absorb a photon with photon energy greater than the band gap, you produce hot charge carriers. And these are carriers that have energy greater than the band gap. And you lose that energy very quickly to phonons. And then you do get your long-lived state at the band gap. So when you go through the numbers, that heat loss represents about 50% of your losses. And the maximum thermodynamic efficiency with these assumptions is about 33%. Okay, so power conversion efficiency is the product of three numbers: the photocurrent at short circuit, how many photons do we absorb and produce current, and what their voltage is, and this fill factor. Okay, so there's only 3 numbers, so that should also be easy. You just have to optimize these 3 numbers. But, of course, there's a competition between the photocurrent and photovoltage. They'll absorb more photons, make your band gap smaller, and your voltage goes down. And so this is sort of, think about it in simple ways, the Shockley quasar analysis. There's some maximum ideal efficient band gap of your semiconductor where you're absorbing enough light, but you're throwing away the high energy photons and throwing away the low energy photons to get the right voltage. Third generation is very high efficiency and low cost. So that's the definition of third generation. In the Shockley quasar analysis, for silicon, you have 19% of the light is not absorbed, 33% is lost to thermalization, you have some extraction losses, so you get 33% available. So what are the strategies for utilizing hot carriers? There's 2 ways to use hot carriers. You can extract them before they cool. This would increase your photovoltage and not decrease your current. You can create additional charge carriers that would increase your photocurrent and not decrease your voltage. Okay. So, and what, of course, what we've been working on is the second one: create additional charge carriers per absorbed photon. So your quantum yield is the number of electron hole pairs per absorbed photon. That needs to be greater than 1. This is an inverse Auger process. Mark mentioned this in the last presentation. If you go through the analysis, and you can do this with the best efficiency, you could increase your theoretical conversion efficiency by about 30%. Now the hot carrier approach, that's this one right here, you could actually do better. You can get up to 67%. Okay, but impact ionization, or MEG as we like to call it now, is when you take this high energy photon and you produce 2 electron pairs. And it looks like I have that slide twice. So, of course, the reason why the hot carrier solar cell is better is because within the MEG approach, between the band gaps of 1 and 2, you can only produce 2 electron hole pairs at 2 times the band gap, and so forth. Whereas in the hot carrier approach, you can ideally extract all of that energy that's available. All right, another quicker question. Let's start here. When you hear quantum dot, you think quantum mechanics is dull. Solar cells. Molecules are smaller than quantum dots. What's the big deal? MEG, artificial atoms. Very good. Keep going. Think here. Okay, most people are answering E. Few people are. This total wrong answer is A. Quantum mechanics is not dull. We just had a great talk from Mark. That was definitely a very interesting talk. So those 3 people who answered A, you got it. E, solar cells, that's what I think. Some people answered C. I also think D. So the best answer here is B and D. E is a good answer too. That's where most people came down. Very good. 50 responses. All right, what is a quantum dot? Well, it's a small chunk of semiconductor. So this is just a size scale. 5 nanometer silicon nanocrystal, multiply that by 50 million, and you get a bowling ball. 0.25 meters, multiply that by 50 million, you get the Earth. So that's the kind of size scale that we're talking about. If you take semiconductors and you put them down on that size scale, you get new and interesting properties. And how is it important for solar energy conversion? Well, you can have these high surface areas, high extinction. You can think about the dye-sensitized nanoporous TiO2, suitable for fast charge separation. So you have your surface is very close, it's good and bad, customizable properties, engineerable size dependence, and so forth, and maybe efficient Exciton generation. Again, just introduction to quantum dots. When you go from atomic properties to bulk properties, and you start adding in these states, then you broaden these energy levels and so forth. And we're right in here in between where we can tune the size and have tunable properties. Okay. Another slide. So these are the quantum dots that we like to look at, infrared quantum dots, and lead selenide. And the thing I'd like to point out here is that if you go from, say, 3.3 nanometers to 3.6 nanometers, that's only 3 angstroms. That's about a monolayer of material in your quantum dot. And you get a noticeable shift of the first exciton absorption. And not only that, but if you think about the number of quantum dots that you're producing in your reaction flask, Avogadro's number, they all have to be pretty nearly the same in order to get these very sharp absorption features, and in order to get this nice shift of the first exciton absorption when you're just changing one monolayer. Okay, you can do other things with the quantum dots. You can make solids out of them. They can be ordered, they can be disordered, and over the next couple of days, you're going to hear some more about that. Matt Lott later today, who's been working on this problem a lot. So, okay. Why do we care for solar energy conversion? Again, I already mentioned this, but I'll do it again. Tunable and controllable properties. You can engineer the band gap. Hopefully you can engineer carrier relaxation, transport, catalytic activity, doping. You can use these as building blocks for functional solids, so you really have added degrees of freedom in approaches to solar conversion, storage, and manipulation. So you make quite interesting types of different particles, putting metals and semiconductors together, putting two semiconductors together, making tetrapods, rods, peanuts, all sorts of different shapes. Metals and semiconductors to have new sort of convergent properties. You have new physics, we believe, multi-exciton generation, slowing of cooling, and so forth. And so this is just a plot, I'll show later, that the MEG efficiency increases when you go to quantum dots. How do quantum dots help with the hot carrier problem? But when you go from this continuous density of states in your valence and conduction bands to discrete energy levels, you can start to control how these excited states relax. So you can maybe slow down this cooling and enhance this MEG process. You also have these surface states that you have to both worry about and also hopefully control. All right, Mark already mentioned excitons and biexcitons, but I'd like to put this up before I go on. Exciton is, well, we're going to talk about excitons in quantum dots, is just an electron-hole pair, excited electron and a hole. In this first exciton transition, biexciton is when we can put 2 in here. Now the lead salt quantum dots are 8-fold degenerate, so we could go up to 8 in the 1s level, and then 1p level would have 6 times that, or something like that. All right, another clicker question. It's the same one as before, so I want to see if you've heard this. When you hear quantum dot, you think, I'll leave this, solar cells, small chunks of semiconductor, excitons, artificial atoms. Good response. Small chunks of semiconductor. Wow, that's good. A's correct too. So 5 people answer it. 6, 7 people. Because I said it was correct. All right, so what we want to know then, because I just said quantum dots are great, we want to know all these different processes. We want to know, okay, we put a photon in, we produce an excited state, it has some excess energy. What happens to that energy? Of course, we want to know how to optimize this process, but it's going to compete with all these other processes, and we need to understand them. So how do these various rates depend upon size, structure, surface states, photon energy, other things? And more importantly, can we control these processes in some rational approach? Now, when we make solar cells, of course, the problem becomes harder because now we're going to put them all together, and they're going to interact. And then, we're going to... Okay. So they're going to interact, and we're going to have fields on them, and so forth. And so now all these processes may change. And so not only do we want to know how they behave individually, but we want to know how do these things change when you start coupling them together. You may want to dope them or charge them. You're going to have fields on them, so forth. And so it's a hard problem. We want to understand all that. That's what we're doing. So how are we going to figure all this out? Okay. All right. We're going to take an aside here and ask a question. When a horse is galloping, I know there's a difference between gallop and trot, but anyway, when a horse is galloping, do all 4 feet come off the ground at the same time, with 2 in the front and 2 behind? 1 foot is always on the ground. 2 feet are always on the ground. All 4 feet come off the ground and are underneath the horse. Or what has this to do with quantum dots and solar cells? Turns out this was a really important question a couple hundred years ago. People thought about this, You can't tell when you're just looking at a horse running if this is the case, the horse is a big thing, If all the feet come off the ground, it's going to fall. So we got A, all 4 feet coming off the ground, 2, 9 people say that. C, 2 feet are always on the ground. D, all 4 feet come off the ground are underneath the horse. But most people are answering E. Okay. All right, so as I said, this was an important question, and a lot of people were thinking about this in 1880, and they were making bets and so forth. So how did they figure it out? Well, this is the early days of time resolved spectroscopy. 1878, Edward Muybridge, he wanted to settle this really cantankerous question. And so this is what he did. He arranged cameras along a track parallel to the horse's path, 24 cameras, that were 27 inches apart, and shutters that were controlled by tripwires triggered by the horse's legs. So, what did he find? Well, here's the pictures. So, let's see. There's one, there's none right there, there's none, one, there's some. So the correct answer is all 4 feet come off and it's underneath the horse. Okay, so that was good. This really actually led to modern day motion pictures and also transient absorption spectroscopy. So the next thing that happened was in 1931, the strobe light photography was invented. This was Harold Egerton. And here he wanted to know, okay, how does a bullet, go through an apple or a light bulb? And with strobe lights, you have these lights that are flashing really fast, and you can trigger that to a shutter and so forth. You get about 200 microsecond time resolution with that. All right, another clicker question. When you hear the word ultrafast spectroscopy, you think the UV vis spectrum really fast, photoluminescence, AG is cool, femtosecond pump probe spectroscopy, or light travels fast. D. Come on. All right, I got some C's. Most people are answering D. Okay, that's good. So you've heard of this before. All right. So what is ultrafast spectroscopy? So we're going to have 2 pulses of light, and we're going to let them go onto a sample. This is like a strobe sort of experiment. We're going to flash this pulse in, and we're going to change the ordering of the pulses. So this is our probe, it's our pump. Our probe comes in, gets absorbed by our sample, goes down in intensity, we have a little photodiode, detects that. If our pump comes in first, changes something in the sample, our probe comes through and say this time it doesn't get absorbed as much, and then we vary the distance between these pulses, or vary the time between these different pulses, and then we can map out the dynamics. These pulses are 100 femtoseconds wide. So, how fast do things happen? Well, one day, it's 24 hours, 6,400 seconds. 1 millisecond, that's 1,000 milliseconds is a second. 1 million microseconds is a second. 1 billion nanoseconds is a second. 1,000 billion picoseconds. And 1 femtosecond is a 1 million billion femtoseconds equals a second. So that's pretty fast. Oh, attoseconds. Some people can do that now. That's a billion billion attoseconds is 1 second. Okay, femtosecond. 1 billion billion femtoseconds. Life of the universe, 13.75 billion years, or about 4 times 10 to the 12 seconds. So there's more femtoseconds in 4 seconds than there are seconds in life of the universe. But, okay, what about the vibrational frequency of 600 nanometer light? That's 5 times 10 to the 14 hertz, or about 50 per picosecond, or 0.5 femtosecond. So let's try to fast first. The typical vibrational frequencies of molecules are 10 to 12, 10 to 14 hertz, or 1 per picosecond. That's 1 terahertz for protection atoms. 1 per femtosecond is 1,000 terahertz. Well, how do you even produce a pulse of light that's that short? Lasers were invented in 1960, so we went from 1931 of strobe lights to lasers in 1960. But lasers, you know, just produce 1 color of light, and usually it's just a CW cover light. So this is supposed to be your high reflector, your output coupler, you have this mode oscillating back and forth here. That's your laser. So, well, what happens, of course, is that you can have lasing medium that lays slightly different wavelengths. So you have, or they lays over a range of wavelengths. Mode on the red side, mode on in the middle, mode in the blue side of the emission spectrum. And if you can get these all lays at the same time, you can think about adding these waveforms up. And if you add enough of them up, the tails of this will cancel out, and you get a nice peak. And that's how you produce femtosecond laser. So in 1982, this very important invention, high sci-fi laser, was constructed in 1982. And what this allows you to do, this is Kerr-Lens mode locking, is it allows you to have all these modes lays simultaneously in your lasing medium. And you can get these nice, very short pulses of light. You can go down to 5 femtoseconds in duration, and they come out with regular intervals depending on how many modes you're building up and so forth. But the most important thing for us is you can just buy it. So nowadays you just go buy a femtosecond laser. That's great. And then you use delay lines. So if you have these 2 pulses that you can split with a beam splitter or so forth, and you can delay them just by changing the path. Because we know the speed of light is 3 times 10 to the 8 meters per second. That's 0.3 millimeters per picosecond. So it only takes 3.3 picoseconds to travel 1 millimeter. And we have femtosecond pulses. We can certainly have delay lines that are controlled to within a micron. So 1 micron change in delay causes the pulse to arrive 6.67 femtoseconds later. And so 1 millimeter is 6.67 picoseconds later. So here's our transient absorption setup. We have the bottom laser that produces 810 nanometers, 60 femtosecond pulses. And we can drive these nonlinear optic things that change this 800 nanometers to whatever wavelength that we want. In this case, 290 to 10 microns, 290 to 220 nanometers. And so then we cross them on our sample, go through some delay lines, and we can do this pumped spectroscopy. Now we're talking about transient absorption in quantum dots. We can have a couple. We just think about a couple of things. Either an induced absorption, so we put an electron up here, and then the next photon comes in and can absorb that now. So before we pumped it, couldn't absorb it, now it can. That's an induced absorption, or a bleach. That is, now that we've got an electron hole pair in there, this state will absorb a little bit less. And we can look at the carrier dynamics. Doing this, when we have a solution of quantum dots, this is our cuvette walls, we've got pulse of light coming through, we've got these huge quantum dots. Some of them absorb one, some of them absorb two, some don't absorb any. This turns out follows Poisson statistics. So you can get this sort of average number of electron hole pairs that are absorbed per quantum dot by the fluence, that's how many photons you're putting on the sample, times the per dot absorption cross section. That's very important. We want to control. We want to know that we only have one or two electron hole pairs produced. So in a typical experiment, we take our quantum dot, we put in a photon, it absorbs one photon per quantum dot, and it's a hot carrier, so it cools very fast, it's about a picosecond. But this 1s exciton state is very long-lived, it's 10 nanoseconds. If we put in two photons, we get a 2 exciton state, a bi-exciton. It cools also very fast. And that 2 exciton state is short-lived. It's only 100 milliseconds. So it's this disparity between the short-lived state and the 1s long-lived state that allows us to study MEG. And so what Victor Clement, Albert Schaller noticed 20 years ago now, is that when they put in a high-energy photon at low fluence, they saw the appearance of this 2 exciton state, and they described that to efficient radiation. So here's an experiment. We have lead cell quantum dots, bandgap of 0.82. We pump at increasing average electron hole pairs, so we're just increasing the laser fluence, and we see the appearance of this 2 exciton state. And we can understand that in terms of these Poisson statistics I mentioned. Now, this 2 exciton state has certain properties. It scales with the nanocrystal volume, so that's very important. Make sure that that's true. Then we do our MEG analysis, where now we're going to hold our average number of electron hole pairs, but we're going to excite at increasing photon energies, and what we observe is the appearance of this fast state. Okay, so as I mentioned, so this is the absorption spectrum of lead cell quantum dots. You can sort of pick out all these different states, and we can turn to people like Mark Lusk to tell us what these energy levels are and where they line up. So we have a 1s state, a 1p state, a 1d state. We can line up our absorption spectrum, so that sort of verifies that these calculations are approximately right. So this 3EG, about 3 times bandgap appears at this 2p transition. So what was proposed by Sasha Efros, Andrew Shavev, Art Nozick, was this sort of coherent superposition of both exciton states. It is when we produce this 2p state, it has the same energy as these different configurations. And these are coupled by this Coulomb interaction, and so you get a coherent superposition of these states. And how that coherent superposition dephases will tell you something about what your quantum yield will be. Okay, so cooling dynamics, of course we have this high energy photon, it's going to cool.
About 10 trillion billion femtoseconds. 10 minutes.
Okay, anyhow. So cooling is very fast, 0.3 to 2 picoseconds. It's much faster than the forward OJ, where you have two excitons going to 1. But anyway, so that's happening. We can sort of measure that in our transient absorption because we're probing down here. We so the appearance of this state should tell us, should show up in our transient absorption. Both exciton generation must be able to compete with that, because we're going to produce 2 electron pairs down here. Following the MEG event, the OJ recombination occurs. Okay? So this is slow, 50 to 100 picoseconds, where all this is occurring within a couple picoseconds. So one of the problems that we've run into in terms of analyzing this is that the changes in the transition occur both from state filling dynamics as well as shifts in the absorption spectrum. So if I am probing, if I'm pumping up here and producing an electron hole pair at the 1p level in this case, and I'm probing down here at the 1s level, I get a shift of this 1s level. This is the calculated absorption spectrum. I get a shift of this 1s level, so I get a derivative feature in my transient absorption and a bleach in the 1p level. And after 3 picoseconds, this shift goes away, like the bleach. So then the bleach, the electron hole comes down into the 1s level, that's all they get, pure bleach. And it's all during these dynamics that MEG is occurring, and so we're sort of working through how to extract out the energy dynamics. So you can see if I probe at different energy, different positions along this 1s level, I get quite different dynamics at this early time, 0 to 4 picoseconds. You can get out things like bi-exciton binding energy. In this case, it's careful. Okay, there's 4 questions about MEG. I'm not going to talk about these, but these are the things that we've been dealing with the last couple of years. Why are there large variations in published data? This has to do with photocharging and pulse-laser experiments. So how do you correctly measure the MEG yields? Are quantum dots better than both at generating both excitons? These 2 issues have been debated a lot in the literature. What are the size-dependent effects? And can these enhanced quantum yields be collected in a quantum solar cell? I won't talk about all of these, just a few, I guess. So one of the schemes that we think about is if you have this hot exciton, it can produce 2 with some rate. That 2 exciton state can produce 3, it has enough energy, and so forth. You can have this scheme, this is sort of a cascading scheme. But it's always in competition with this cooling rate. And if you go through and you say, okay, what is the quantum yield of this multi-exciton state? You get something like this. 1 plus the rate of the MEG over some of the rates. Next higher term gives you sum of the 2. Going from 2 to 1 and 3 to 2 over some of these rates. And so this was something that Mark showed before as well. Very similar or very common expression. But anyway, so it turns out that the cooling rate at high energies is constant with energy for various reasons. But the MEG rate increases with excess photon energy. So you go through all that, you get this threshold energy, that is the photon energy where you start occurring, where MEG starts occurring, is related to the ratio between these rates. The cooling rate and the MEG rate is 2 plus 1 over T. So if the MEG rate is much, much greater than the cooling rate, and this will turn on right at 2 pairs of band gap, that's the energy conservation limit. If they're more, if they're on the same order of magnitude, then it's going to turn on at a lower energy, and it's going to increase at a slower rate. So this increase here, these are quantum yield versus H nu over E sub G. So here's the perfect case where you can produce 2 electron hole pairs with 2 times the band gap, 3 at 3 times the band gap, and so forth. And by changing this ratio between the cooling and MEG rates, you can start to get these different lines. Where are the experiments? Lead selenide, quantum dots are along this line, which have an efficiency right here of 0.6. Bulk lead selenide is along this line with 0.31. So the efficiency of MEG increases by about a factor of 2. From bulk lead selenide up to lead selenide quantum dots. And it appears that there's another increase from going from quantum dots up to nanobots. Of course, we can go back to our Shockwave quasar analysis. For solar applications, what's important is to have this turn on as close to 2 times the band gap as possible. If you can get into the staircase function, that is where you have 2 at 2 electron volt pairs and so forth, then you can get the greatest benefit. But if you can turn it on at 2 times the band gap and goes on linearly after that, you can still have a significant impact on the theoretical conditions. So how are we going to go about doing that? Well, we can also look at the lessons learned from bulk semiconductors, or from what's known so far, bulk lead selenide, bulk germanium. The silicon is right in here. It's the most efficient bulk semiconductor. And here's our lead selenide quantum dots. There's been some reports on indium phosphide quantum dots, on single wall carbon nanotubes, which I think you'll hear about in a couple of weeks. Drop across. So this efficiency here is the fundamental band gap over the electron volt pair creation energy. That is how much energy it takes to produce electron volt. Okay. What I wanted to end out with is what are the size-dependent effects. So we studied this in samples of lead sulfide and lead sulfide selenide alloys. We got quantum yields that looked like a mess, but there's some structure to this. These are the lead selenide quantum dots. These are the lead sulfide selenide alloy results in the blue are the lead sulfide. If you look at these individually, then what you can see is that for samples that have particular diameters, alpha fall along these particular lines, so you can get out an efficiency. For each quantum dot size, we can plot that as a function of radius, and you can see there's a nice linear dependence of this energy efficiency as a function of the diameter. If you normalize that to the dwarfs on radius, then they all fall on the line. Okay, we can look at that if you want to. So I wanted to end here. MEG is a potential way to increase solar energy conversion in quantum dot solar cells. I did a show that you probably saw from yesterday that quantum dot solar cells can be constructed with high photocurrents and high internal quantum efficiencies. MEG is at least 2 times as efficient as impact ionization in both materials, in both selenide and minerals. And it's been shown in the photocurrent. Finally, I want to acknowledge all the great people at NREL that I have worked with, Justin and Tavi, Joey Luther, Barbara, of course, Jimbo, Scott Berger, Shane Yu, and also people within the Center for Advanced Solar Photophysics, which is an EFRC joint between Los Alamos and NREL. Victor Klimov, Art Nozick, Sasha Frost, Matt Lott, you'll hear from later, Jason Stewart, Los Alamos, and thanks. Excellent.
And red shirt. You mentioned that correct me if I'm wrong, by Exciton lifetime increases the size, is that what you said?
That's right.
And the smaller size particles have better MEG efficiency.
That's true. Yeah.
Is there when thinking about making a device there, is there a trade-off in terms of getting improved MEG efficiency versus the lifetime of your excitons?
In terms of, because the 2 exciton state is faster at smaller dots, and the MEG is higher, is that what we're saying? So
well,
you have to get those carriers off before they
before they
recombine.
thermalize or whatever, but if you make the dots too small, then you're decreasing your lifetime of your excitons. If you make them too big, you're decreasing your MEG yield. Am I thinking about that right, or is this?
Yeah, no, that's okay. So when you start making these in a solar cell, and I haven't talked about what happens when you start making films of these quantum dots. So there's a question, you've got to have these dots that are electronically coupled to each other. So one question is, does that electronically coupling change the MEG, right? And then can you get the 2 exciton state, can you separate that 2 exciton state prior to OJ recombination? So say that's 100 picoseconds, 50 picoseconds. You need to get that carrier off prior to that. So and those are very good questions, and questions that are sort of ongoing research questions. We've shown in the solar cell that you can get 2 electron hole pairs out with roughly the same efficiencies that we see in the ultrafast spectroscopy measurements. But there may be some trade-off there for sure, and that's something to certainly be explored. Yeah.
Thank you for your insight. I would like to know this quantum efficiency. Is it related to luminescence property of this quantum dot, and also is it related to the surface functionalization or surface polymers or any surfactant attached on the surface of this quantum dot?
Well, so the luminescence efficiency is how well the electron hole pairs luminesce relative to some other property like non-radiative recombination. So, MEG is occurring much faster than luminescence. So in some sense, it shouldn't matter. It shouldn't depend on that luminescence. It shouldn't depend on what the luminescence efficiency is. The luminescence efficiency can tell you something about, again, these other sort of non-radiative processes, might be surface traps and so forth. Now, if you have a surface ligand on your quantum dot, it can affect MEG by maybe 2 ways that I can think of right now, and that is at high energy. There's been some calculations that show that the states of the quantum dot, these high excited states, start to be affected by what these ligand states are. And so that might affect things for sure. And the other way is these ligand modes, these low frequency vibrational modes of the ligand can accept the hot carrier energy. And that's going to compete with the energy process. So that, again, hasn't all been worked out experimentally. There's been some signs that the ligands can affect things. Definitely affects this photocharging that's been studied. And what's on your surface can affect that for sure. But how it affects MEG is still sort of an open question.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, I'm going to cut this short. We have 7 minutes until Matt comes up here again, so we'll give him a quick breather and see you all at 25 after.